Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm James Shaheen, Tricycle's Editor-in-Chief, and I'm happy to be here with you today for I'm Mindful, Now What with Andrew Holecek. So this is a Tricycle premium event, and we hold these events monthly. But just for today, all of our subscribers are welcome. And if you're not a premium subscriber and would like to attend events like this, you can upgrade by accessing your account online or writing to support@tricycle.org. Tricycle is a nonprofit, and if you'd like to learn more about our mission or donate to Tricycle, visit tricycle.org/donate. We'll be leaving time for questions at the end of this hour-long session. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, but just a reminder, the Q&A tab is for questions. The chat is for you to tell us where you're from. Today's Zoom session will be recorded. We'll share the replay link in a follow-up email. My guest today is Andrew Holecek. Andrew is an author and spiritual teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. He leads seminars and workshops centered around meditation, dream yoga, and preparation for death. He teaches 2 online courses with Tricycle, Dream Yoga, which is currently in its 2nd live run. We will drop the link to the chat if you'd like to enroll. And Living and Dying, Navigating the Bardos. Andrew also has a whole suite of offerings at his site too. Maybe he can tell us what that link is. But we do include a link to his new book in the chat, I'm Mindful, Now What? And on September 11th, in case you don't get enough here, and certainly this is a truncated version, we'll be dropping a podcast episode with Andrew, so keep an eye out for that. You can go to tricycle.org/podcast. And on September 11th, you'll be able to access his episode. So welcome, Andrew. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, James. Always such a delight to spend time with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So I'm looking at your piano in the background. In case you don't know, and I didn't say, Andrew is also a concert pianist, so among other things.
My real passion.
Your new book is called Mindful, Now What? Moving Beyond Mindfulness to Meet the Modern World. And that bit of the title, Now What, seems to drive the book. Do you want to tell us what that's about?
Yeah, totally. Obviously, there's so much to say about the extraordinary benefits of mindfulness and mindfulness revolution. You know, there's, I think, some 17,000 studies that have shown just how transformative it is. And it's a spectacular practice, but it also has a limited applicability and bandwidth. And as I write about in the book, even at its summits, mindfulness sedates. It doesn't liberate. And that's not an overt criticism. I mean, in a world that's on fire, chilling out is a really good thing. But playfully, it just brings you to the penthouse of samsara, right? The highest levels of absorption, which are fantastic, the samadhis, jhana states. These are extraordinary, refined states of consciousness. But there's so much more. And so what I try to do in this book is endorse the extraordinary power of mindfulness, but then also healthy criticism, situating it, and showing how we can really be used as a platform for practices that transcend but include mindfulness. So mindfulness is there as, in fact, that platform, but there are so many other directions that we can take on top of that.
So, Andrew, I'd like to spend time discussing some of the forms of meditation you discuss in the book, particularly the nocturnal meditations.
Cool.
But first, I'd like to ask you about your understanding of meditation itself. To start, you mentioned 2 approaches, training and discovery, and I think these are important, especially in the context of nocturnal meditations. Can you say more about what you mean by this distinction?
Yeah, totally. And also, just very briefly, I think it's worth throwing into the mix that meditation is a multivalent term. It's a little bit like the use of the word sports. So when you talk about meditation, almost everybody thinks of mindfulness, but when you say sports, I mean, there's hundreds of sports, and there are literally hundreds of meditations. So it's the same thing. And so, oh, I'm sorry, what was the C question? It just escaped my mind.
Yeah, you refer to 2 approaches to meditation.
Oh, yes.
And training and discovery.
Yeah, I think this is important. So on one level, kind of a more relative path of effort, meditation is really just like any other endeavor, like me learning how to play this piano. You spend a lot of hours, a lot of time on the cushion, working to develop certain particular qualities of mind. 100% valid approach. But a more absolute approach, which actually goes back into our Greek intellectual history with Plato and his whole notion of anamnesis, the process of recollection, that according to this more absolute approach, we already have these qualities. They're not anything that can actually be cultivated. They literally are discovered. And so this is important to, I think, balance because on one level, people can get a little bit too effortful, a little bit too tight, white knuckling, trying to achieve. When I think Deepak Chopra says it's quite beautifully, all this effort to learn when all we really have to do is remember. And so this really comes into fruition when we're talking about some of the more advanced meditations, where fundamentally, really, the fundamental instruction there is openness and relaxation and literally uncovering, remembering, um, discovering these particular dimensions of experience. And that's actually very helpful to keep in mind because then really, what do? Well, we just chill, we relax, we open, and voila, these amazing capacities take place. And so this applies across the spectrum of practices. If we get a chance to talk about the nocturnal meditations, it applies then. It applies to a whole different host of practices. And therefore, it kind of helps us balance this middle way approach between not too tight, not too loose. If we're too tight, that can backfire. But also, if we're too loose, if we don't know how to open and relax properly, that can also be somewhat problematic. But I think just being aware of those two kind of trajectories or vectors, I think is very helpful.
Yeah, you say that meditation is the most natural thing in the world. It's like coming home. And that certainly resonates with the meditations that we're going to get to. But you also pose the question, where then does effort apply?
Yeah, effort applies in creating the proper environment, proper holding environment. I mean, really, when you think about it, this is the amazing importance even of posture and body. I mean, the radical teacher Trungpa Rinpoche once said, just by taking the proper posture, sooner or later, you will find yourself meditating. So this is a great question. So effort really is about creating a proper holding environment. So let's say using the notion of lucidity. Let's say you want to create a spark of a lucidity, it's just a code word for awareness, as we'll see. Well, I remember very clearly, it was such a cool experience when I was a kid. I went to the Smithsonian Museum and they were going to demonstrate with this big block of wood, create a strike of lightning. I said, well, this is awesome. So what did they do? They created the proper atmospheric conditions. And as you know, this is a fundamental principle of the Buddhist doctrine altogether, the teachings of dependent origination. And so here we are in this little gallery, and they create the proper atmosphere, electrical potential, all these particular environmental situations are there. And then wham, strike of lightning. And so effort is like, yeah, just that, creating a mandala, if you like Tibetan Buddhist principles, creating proper holding environment. This also really comes into play around the death and dying practices, where environmental conditions are really the essence of that. So that's really where the effort takes place. And you feel this if you ever enter a sacred space, just being in that space has an effect on you. And even like I said at the outset, holding your posture, if you're really couch potato posture and you're all frowned and collapsed, that definitely has an effect on your mind. If you raise your posture up, uplifted, that also in a bidirectional way invokes correlative states of mind. So it comes down to how we work with effort. With environment.
Okay, so now let's get to the good stuff, nocturnal meditations.
Cool.
I
My
mean,
favorite.
especially with regard to discovery, we discover the wonders of the nocturnal mind through these
Yeah,
nocturnal meditations. So we may not get through them all, we'll try, but let's begin with liminal dreaming.
sure. Yeah, so there's 5 of these puppies. We'll start with the first one, like you said, liminal dreaming. Liminality is the word literally means threshold. And liminal principles themselves are really interesting. And so this is another reason to explore the liminal dimension. But technically speaking, what it is, it's that moment when your head hits the pillow before, when your head hits the pillow before you actually fall asleep. You're in this kind of interdimensional state, this kind of plasma state of mind. We know what it's like. Not quite here, not quite there, not quite awake, not quite asleep. And for most of us, we just kind of like whatever, just check out or do what we normally do. That's kind of non-lucid approach to sleep. And so with liminal dreaming, what we do, we create what's called an observational intent, which is exactly and as simple as it sounds. You create the intent to observe your mind, to develop this kind of witness awareness, to really watch the play of your mind as it goes offline from the daily activity, transitions into the nocturnal arena. And I retrofitted this practice, James, a couple of years ago, when I started to study a little bit more about it. You know, the classic teachings on lucid dreaming, dream yoga, sleep yoga, which we'll get to in a second, don't really talk about liminality or liminal dreaming. But I retrofitted it because it works. It is a practice in its own, which I'll say a little bit more about. And it's also a fantastic, what's called lucid sleep onset practice. In other words, it's a great way to grease the skids for lucid dreaming, which is the second practice. And so what one can do here is really interesting. It's a tremendous dimension of mind for creativity. There's some recent data about this. And then also people like Thomas Edison and Salvador Dali did some really interesting things where they would basically nod off on a chair with a spoon or some ball bearings in their hand. And then as they were starting to just drop off, the spoon, whatever, the ball bearings would drop, they'd clang on a plate or the floor, and they'd wake them up. And so both these creative geniuses would then troll this particular dimension of consciousness, this kind of liminal space for their creative insights. And so for practitioners, this is also a really cool thing because, hey, have you ever meditated after lunch on a hot day in a long sesshin or a datsun or something? I mean, you're sitting there on the cushion, you know, you're just struggling with this heavy, soggy mind. Well, here's a way, instead of wrestling with that mind, to embrace it and say, oh, wow, here I am. My mind is really soggy. I'm like not really able to stay with my practice. I'm going to work with liminal dreaming. So what do? Well, create the intention, like I mentioned, to watch your mind. And then I'll plant just a couple ideas for what to be aware of. It's really kind of cool. You'll start to notice, you'll do it when you're in the cushion dozing off or at night when you're sleeping. Let's say you're sleeping, you lie down and, you know, pay attention to your mind. It's usually just thinking. You know, you're just basically ruminating, reflecting upon the day. Well, if you start to pay attention to what your mind is doing, sooner or later, the mind will shift into thinking imaging. In other words, thoughts slowly start to be replaced with images, with pictures. So this is a really interesting thing. The scientists talk about it as a thought image amalgamation, which is exactly what it is. Thoughts are starting to morph into images, and then those images will eventually morph further into dreams. And you can have these really very fascinating dreamlets. You can actually watch a thought. Tartan Tuku wrote about this 50 years ago in his book, Openness Mind. You can watch a thought with your mindfulness. You can watch that thought transition into an image. Then you can watch that image actually metaphorically inflate into a very brief lucid dreamlet. These might last 3, 4, 5 seconds. They're completely legitimate lucid dreams. They're just really short, usually too short to actually engage in. But you can engage in a kind of witness awareness even with that lucid dream. So this doubles also then, James, as a type of dream incubation. This is what you can then work to actually seed a dream. And then lastly, because there's so much to say here, and this is probably the most interesting for practitioners, is the liminal space. And by the way, this applies as you're going to sleep. That's called hypnagogic, leading to sleep, leading to the god of sleep. But it also applies on the back end when you wake up in the morning. That's hypnopompic, leading away from sleep, leading away from the god of sleep. And in both these kind of interdimensional spaces, you can witness as a meditator two really cool things. You can actually start to see the narrative structure of this self-sense start to come undone as you fall asleep. And of course, if it didn't do that, what's that? Well, one of the 7 forms of insomnia. That's what keeps us up. So the ego, the self-sense, has to fall apart or you're not going to fall asleep. So you can watch the deconstruction of the storyline that is you. This in itself is profound because then you go, oh my gosh, I am nothing but this storyline. So that storyline goes offline when you go to sleep. Liminal dreaming helps you watch that. And then guess what? You wake up in the morning. When you first wake up, there's a fresh moment of insight. Pay very close attention there. There'll be no narrative self there. The Rolodex hasn't started yet. You know, you haven't really started spinning into your day. But with liminal practice on the back end, you start to see how it is, as Ellen Hobbs out of Harvard says, is the self literally has to be remembered every day. And in Buddhist psychology, every moment. So it's the most remarkable thing. You see how the self sense comes offline every night. You literally, if it didn't do that, you wouldn't fall asleep. In the morning, you see how that self sense, the narrative, the storyline comes back on. And then if you start to see that who you think you are is nothing but a story, hey, guess what? I can change this story. I'm not as solid, reified, concretized as I am. And so I'll pause there because there's so much more to explore with it. But I really enjoy talking about this practice because this is the most accessible of the five nocturnal practices. And in and of itself, it's quite profound. It can lead to some really great insights.
I don't want to sidetrack us, but as you were talking, I started thinking, what keeps me up at night? So anxiety can, and I think what is more immersed in self-centered fear than anxiety? And it's interesting, you're not really letting that dissolution process take place. I'm not saying I have a cure for insomnia or that I understand it, but it's just an interesting metaphor.
Well, this is, and it's spot on. And this actually, I'm a member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. I work with these techniques in my clinical practice. And what you can do here as a practitioner, if in fact you have insomnia, there's many forms. So let's say you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't fall back asleep. I mean, how often does this happen to us? Well, instead of the usual kind of contentious adversarial relationship to your mind, instead of, oh crap, you can say, oh wow, I can work with liminal states here because that's what's happening when you wake up in the middle of the night. You're not awake, you're not asleep, you're in this kind of plasma space. And so your liminal practice comes back in then, and you can actually watch. They used to call it the hour of God. Prior to the advent of artificial light, appropriately named, sleep was not consolidated the way it is now. We had what's called biphasic sleep. We'd sleep for the first half of the night for 4 hours when the sun set, get up for about 2 hours. They call that the hour of God. There's some traditions, a really compelling way to look at the middle of the night. And then they fall asleep for the second sleep of the night. So I just wanted to throw this into the mix because some writers are now saying that a lot of people who do wake up in the middle of the night, this is kind of an archaeology of consciousness. This is a residue of the pre kind of artificial light era when people usually slept in these two phases. But just a sidebar, wake up in the middle of the night, instead of fighting your mind, oh, liminal dreaming. I'm going to watch my mind. It's called pellucidity. I'm going to witness my mind. And you start to see all these little things you just never seen before. That's no small thing. So my friend Alan Wallace, who writes about dream yoga with some regularity, he talks about these nocturnal practices as a form of nighttime insight meditation. In other words, nocturnal vipassana. That's actually really interesting because that quality of insight is literally, this is another post-mindfulness practice. This now can turn into a nocturnal process of working with the mind in this dimension. So something like that.
That's great, Andrew. Let's go to lucid dreaming. I don't know if we'll get through these, but just a reminder to our listeners, you can put a question in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and Andrew will be happy to answer your questions. But for now, let's move on to lucid dreaming.
Yeah, this is the biggie. This is the granddaddy. I mean, scientifically proven in 1975 by Keith Hearn in England, and then 77 by my dear friend Stephen LaBerge out of Stanford. It's been proven, substantiated countless times. In fact, I was in a sleep lab a month ago in Northwestern University doing some studies, some really, really fascinating bidirectional communication between lucid dreamers and the lab. Really cool stuff. So lucid dreaming, this is a big one. So this is that wonderful dimension of experience when you're dreaming. So you're in a nighttime dream and something clues you into the fact that you're dreaming. It's usually some anomalous, weird, incongruent, just kind of dreamlike experience. And you go, wait a second, I can't do this in normal life. I must be dreaming. So you actually maintain, you reattain consciousness. Sometimes it's called a metacognitive type of dream or a hybrid state of consciousness where the conscious mind is facing the unconscious mind directly. And this is where the goods lie because 95%, the neuroscientists are unequivocal about this. Think about this. 95% of what we do is dictated by unconscious processes. Hello? I mean, we are just living on the surface of the dimensions of our mind. And so, short of hypnosis, and only 10% of people are actually hypnotizable in a deep sense, the only other dimension where the conscious mind can face the unconscious mind and transform it directly is the lucid dreaming state. And so this is why Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist out of UC Berkeley, he has an amazing statement here. He says it is possible that lucid dreamers represent the next iteration in Homo sapiens evolution. Wow, that's no small claim. So this is why I get so jazzed about it. So you wake up in the dream. It's really like entering this kind of night school. This is my languaging. So we enter the dream state, according to my friend LaBerge, Stephen LaBerge, about 500,000 times. Think about that number. 25% of every night is spent in REM sleep. That's mostly when we dream. That adds up to about a month a year. That adds up roughly 6 years or more in an average lifetime. You can get a PhD in less than 6 years. And so if think about it, if you can attain lucidity in the dream arena, in a dimension of consciousness that is more foundational than the waking state, you're entering a type of hyper pedagogy, a type of hyper educational arena where you can really transform and very profoundly, very quickly. And so, again, unless we think this is just some hyperbole, well, scientists again have shown this is so fascinating that if they have someone in the scanner, and let's say, they're playing a piano. I do this often in my dream. I'll conjure up my beautiful Steinway. I'll be playing a Beethoven sonata. Well, if I was in a scanner, the right hemisphere in my brain, as I'm dreaming, would light up exactly the same way as if I was doing it during the day. Or I pull off one of my science books here and I'm doing a logic problem. Well, guess what? My left hemisphere is lit up. Your brain cannot tell the difference between something that's dreamt, visualized, or experienced. Let that settle in. And so you're in there, you're doing, and there's some really cool YouTube clips on this. You're in there doing your thing at night. And the way you work with changing your mind changes your brain. It's called neuroplasticity. So this is why the scientists get really excited about this, James. That it's like you can accelerate your education, your learning, your transformation. So you can use it for rehearsing performances. Again, I do it when I'm rehearsing talks in my dreams. I'm not exaggerating, or I rehearse my Beethoven sonatas. You can use it for conflict resolution, just very briefly. If you're having an issue with someone psychotherapeutically, unless the person is somehow physically violating you, the person does not need to be in the therapist's office for you to resolve the issue. They only have to be there phenomenally. They just have to appear to you in your mind. Well, in exactly the same way, you can engage in role playing in the lucid dream. You can engage in tremendous therapeutic work in the context of a dream and prevent yourself a lot of unnecessary hardship. You can deal with grief in the dream. You can improve physical performances in the dream. There are array of benefits here is almost too good to be true. But again, the science, there's a lot of studies on this one. The science is there. So again, I'll pause for just a second, but in terms of distinguishing this from dream yoga, because this is where the practices then become spiritual, in my cartography of these meditations, lucid dreaming is largely psychological in nature, keeps the dream from turning into a nightmare. Dream yoga wakes you up from the dream altogether. So lucid dreaming is psychological and about really largely about self-fulfillment. Dream yoga is more spiritual in nature, and it's more about self-transcendence. So just like all the mindfulness practices, they transcend but include mindfulness. Every one of the 5 nocturnal meditations follows that same narrative of transcend but include. Lucid dreaming transcends but includes liminal dreaming. Dream yoga transcends but includes both of those and on up. So I'll pause there because the topic is so big. I'm just curious where you might want to run with it. It's just such a rich topic.
Yeah, explain the progression to dream yoga. We're waking up from what? Or we're waking up within the dream, or it has a deeper spiritual
Yes.
connotation. So go ahead.
Yeah. So this is for most people listening here. This is where things really come to play for us. So again, you're using your lucid dreaming as a platform. So no lucid dreams, no dream yoga. And so with dream yoga, you maintain your lucidity. You wake up in the dream. And here's one thing that interesting that's worth throwing into the mix. There's one thing that is not advertised very much in the lucid dreaming arena. Whenever intention is involved, habit slash karma is created. So this is a big deal. In other words, lucid dreaming and dream yoga are not karmically tax-free. So what I mean by this is, let's say you're doing classic lucid dreaming, where they sell it, it's sexy, it sells, fulfill your wildest fantasies in the sanctuary of your own mind. Hey, that sounds great to me. But what they don't tell you is, in fact, that when you're doing what you do in a dream, this is, by the way, parenthetically, why Carl Jung, one of the great elite dreamers of the last century, never fully endorsed lucid dreaming. He was 100% aware of this practice, but he realized that the massive near enemy of egoic inflation, self-aggrandizement. You can go in there and become an ultra narcissist in the dream and just create whatever you want. Well, that creates habit patterns again in this neuroplastic kind of vector. It changes your structure of your brain, and it actually, according to yogic theory, changes the structure of your subtle body. So, dream yoga, you wake up in the dream, and now it's like you wake up literally. It's like, okay, there's 9 stages. This is my mapping. I basically flesh out the 3 classic stages, which are pretty steep in the traditional text. So I have these kind of 9 stages of dream yoga. And so you wake up in a dream, and now instead of soaring and flying and doing whatever you do in a lucid dream, well, you wake up and you go, no, I'm going to work with my mind in this capacity. And so think about this. Why do you want to do this? Why is this helpful? Well, what are dreams made of? Dreams are made of your mind. They're just your mind in a highly refined and distilled environment. And so therefore, again, what you do in the dream state, because it's so foundational, because you're heading down to the reduction base of consciousness itself, when you start to work down and work with the roots of your being, you change the leaves and the branches and everything above. And this is why this is no exaggeration, James. You can have one, what's called hyperlucid dream, a dream that's actually more real than this, just one of these puppies, and it will change your life forever. It's like a near-death experience. Why does one near-death experience change you so irrevocably? Because it's so foundational. And so one hyperlucid dream, and I've been blessed with these, it is a game changer, man. You wake up from one of those puppies, and this appears to be the shadowy dream. So briefly, what you work with in the dream arena is you're working fundamentally with the dimensions of what Buddhism refers to as emptiness. So this is basically 9 stages of progressive meditation on stages of emptiness. And Sogyal Rinpoche, one of the great Tibetan masters who teaches on this, he says the nocturnal dream arena is the ideal classroom for emptiness. And so this is a nice example. When you're in a dream and everything's fluid and moving around, it's a highly plastic environment. That's an expression of the empty nature of reality. So, but what does then is then works through these stages. Each one's a little bit more refined. And let me just give you one example of how this works and how it might, why you may be bothered or want to be bothered with this practice. So here's one practice. So you wake up in the dream tonight, and let's say, okay, tonight I'm going to work with stage 2 dream yoga, transforming objects. So let's say you wake up and you're dreaming, and there's a dream pen. So the exercise is to take the dream pen and transform it into a sticky pad or whatever. It just doesn't matter. Whatever arises, you want to transform it into something else. Okay, like, well, why do you want to do this? Is this just like some video cognitive game or something? No, this is really profound, because what happens, and I cannot tell you how often this has happened for me. What you will notice is in a bidirectional way, and so this is my languaging, but you're basically working with 2 different states of consciousness that are previously restricted. You're opening a type of interstate commerce between the waking and the dreaming state. And so these states are affecting each other whether you know it or not anyway. I mean, you dream at night what you think of during the day, and what you dream of at night can affect what you think of during the day. So here's the way it works for me. So let's say the next day I wake up, I'm getting in a challenging conversation with my partner, with my boss or something, and I'm just about to lose it. I'm about to go non-lucid. And I cannot tell you how many times this has happened to me. It's like those annoying pop-ups on your computer, right? Something will pop up in the middle. I'm just about to say something I'm going to regret. And guess what? The memory of me transforming this pen into this sticky pad will pop into my head. And it's like, well, wait a second. This anger that's developing is no more solid than that dream pen. And so just before I go non-lucid and get in trouble, I'll go, wait a second. This is a dream. This is my friend Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche says this is so great. This is a dream. I am free. I can change. That is colossal. And so you take the insights in this bidirectional way and you realize, hey, wait a second, how much different is this state of consciousness than that? Well, according to the Buddha, literally the awakened one, that's what the word means, the ultimate lucid dreamer, there's no difference. In fact, what the Buddha woke up from and what he woke up to, and then I'll pause, the Buddha woke up from the nightmare of reification. That's a big word that means the nightmare of taking things to be so literally, so solidly, so seriously. We suffer in direct proportion to how much we do that. So he woke up from the nightmare of reification to, in fact, he woke up to a world that is dreamlike, that is empty in nature, that is de-reified. This is a game changer. Then otherwise this world that, I'm a victim of this world and everything is so heavy and so oppressive. This is the darkened view. With this view, it's like, hey, wait a second, is this any more real than what I dreamt last night? And so that's the really juicy part here. And again, it takes you all the way to some super subtle, highly refined stage 8, 9, which I can talk to you about, but I'll pause for a second because there's a lot.
Okay, just very briefly, a quick question.
Totally.
When you recognize that anger and you're about to lose it, in the same way that you transform the pen into a sticky pad, are you able, based on this practice, to transform that anger into something positive?
That's exactly right. You just filled in the blank. Empathy, kindness, compassion, tolerance, understanding. You realize that your states of mind are not as bloody, solid, and serious as you think they are. And the minute you discover this empty, plastic nature of your mental experience, you don't think that's liberating? You don't think that enlightens your relationship to the contents of your mind? So again, this basically is another way to work with this fundamental teaching, arguably the core teaching in Buddhism, emptiness. Basically freeing things up from this projected, solidified agenda that we have that causes us and so many other people so much hardship.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to put two of them together, sleep and Bardo yoga, just because we're down
Totally.
to two. And we're not going to get to dark meditation, but we are going to have you back when you have more on dark meditation
Totally.
on the podcast. But for now, let's look at sleep and Bardo yoga.
And sleep and dream. Yeah. So these are the last two. So now we're entering when we go to the last two. So liminal dreaming, lucid dreaming, dream yoga. Last two is sleep yoga. Deeply connected to what the Hindus talk about as yoga nidra. High level yoga nidra is the same as sleep yoga, also called luminosity yoga. And then, of course, the death preparatory practice is Bardo yoga. And so here's the way this works. So just very briefly, lucid sleep has not yet been substantiated scientifically, but it is about to. The work of Tom Metzinger, Melanie Boley, there's some really clever scientists. I'm in contact with these people. Once this is substantiated, James, Tom Metzinger, who's one of the world's leading philosophers, says this will be a revolution in the mind sciences. What do you mean? You can be awake and asleep? I mean, dead, delta, deep, dreamless sleep, and you're conscious? Yes, totally, you can do it. So once this is substantiated, this is huge. So this is a big deal because according to the world wisdom traditions, the non-dual traditions, we have it all backwards. We are actually the most asleep in the constricted myopic waking state. And as Ramana Maharshi, the great Advaita Vedanta teacher, said so beautifully, that which does not exist in deep dreamless sleep is not real. That's amazing. So if we're actually lucid to it, this is amazing. If we're actually lucid to it, we are more awake in the dream state, in other words, in closer contact with absolute truth. And then we're the most in contact with reality in the deep dreamless state called causal consciousness in the Hindu tradition. So the great thing here is this is the dimension of consciousness where when you enter this complete awareness in the dream state, awareness of absence is not absence of awareness. That's the jingle here. Awareness of absence is not absence of awareness. It's just really super subtle awareness. But super subtle is not ineffectual. That's why it's called causal consciousness. This is what gives rise to everything. So when you drop into the lucid sleep state, and you can do this through dream yoga, for those of you who do dream yoga, very briefly, I just did this the other night, stage 9 practice. The next time you have a lucid dream, check this out. Intentionally say, okay, what am I going to do today? I want to have a lucid sleep experience. How do I do that? Try falling back in the dream, just to give you something to play with. So you're dreaming, you have a dream body. Actually, you're creating it as you think you have it. Literally fall back in your dream body and see where it takes you. Now, the reason you want to do this and how this relates to the death thing, and then I'll pause, is that dreamless, right? Dreamless deep, dreamless sleep. Dreamless means formless. Formless means deathless. And so this is where sleep yoga then transitions into bardo yoga. You work with that dreamless dimension of that formless, dreamless dimension of your mind as a way to prepare for the formless, literally called dream at the end of time. This is so cool. The Tibetans talk about 3 types of dreams, James. The nighttime dream. They also call it the double delusion. How interesting is that? Or the example dream, really interesting name, which intimates or implies this is the primary delusion. This is the primary dream. So that's dream number 1. Dream number 2. What's dream number 3? They talk about it as dream at the end of time. That's the death. So what this, again, so much to say, what this implies, and this is my languaging, dream is code language for manifestation of mind. So when you're actually working with it at the deepest level, this actually helps you understand where you're going to go when you die. You're simply going to transition from one dream to the next, from one manifestation of mind to the next. So right in the middle, we have lucid dreaming and dream yoga. This is not just a bi-directional practice that I talked about earlier. In other words, lucid dreaming leads to lucid living. I implied that earlier with the interstate traffic thing. Well, wait, if you order today in the next 20 minutes, it's tri-directional. In other words, lucid dreaming, dream yoga leads to lucid dying. Padmasambhava, the great tantric master who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet, he writes, if you can attain lucidity 7 times, that's basically an archetypal number that means like some constancy. He says that that will pretty much guarantee lucidity during the death journey. And so then you have a lucid dying experience. And so just like in the nocturnal mind, and then I'll pause for a second, if you don't wake up and take control of your dreaming mind, James, what does? It's like what Trungpa Rinpoche answered when somebody asked him, what is it that reincarnates? Remember his great line? Your bad habits. What a great line. Your karma. So if you don't wake up and take control of your mind when you dream, what controls your mind? Your habits, your karma. If you don't wake up and take control at the end, the dream at the end of time, what controls the after-death journey, according to the Tibetans? Your habits, your karma. What do you do when you're working with the lucid dreaming nocturnal mind? You're working to change your habits / karma. And so therefore, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche says this, many Tibetan masters say this, dream yoga specifically came about to prepare for death, sleep yoga even more so. And the Greeks say this as well, Hypnos, the god of sleep, Thanatos, the god of death, they're not just brothers, they are twins. So by understanding and working with this practice during life, during the day, according to these teachings, it massively pays dividends at the dream at the end of time. So there you go. There's a crash course in the 5 nocturnal meditations.
Okay, I'm going to skip dark meditation in order to
For now.
questions. Yeah, for now, you'll be back, but I'm going to get to the questions now. Sarah Bean writes, very interested in this interpersonal aspect in dreams. Has anyone ever studied 2 people engaging in dream studies to that end?
You mean you're talking about sounds like a shared dream, if I'm hearing that properly? If not, you can come on and clarify it. Yes, it depends on who you talk to here. Some people, like my friend, the dream researcher, Stephen LeBerge, is more skeptical about this. He says there aren't so much shared dreams as there are shared themes. However, I have talked to a handful of people. I've never had a dream of this sort. I've had quite a variety of lucid dreams. But some of my dream colleagues who I trust completely, they have no reason to lie to me, have in fact told me that if I understand your question, yes, they create an intention before they fall asleep, that they will meet in a shared dream space. They do their whatever they do, they come back, they compare notes, and they go, yep, that was me, and we did this. So the jury scientifically is out on this. Phenomenologically, this is not that easy to substantiate. But again, the people that I know who are elite dreamers, and they tell me they do this, I believe them. It's not part of my dream experience, but it seems to be available to dreamers.
Okay, that in fact is what Sarah was asking. She answered yes. So,
Yeah.
um, okay, David St. Martin asks, hi, Andrew. Thank you for this time. I'm very interested in using the dreaming state as part of gaining insights to solve problems and
Yeah.
discover solutions, which is something you touched on.
So let me say a little bit more about that. I'm sorry, did I cut you off, James? Was there more on
No,
that
you didn't.
or?
That's it.
Yeah, so this is spot on. This is what you can do with dream incubation. You can intentionally create the uh, the motive, the intention. I want to solve this particular problem. You go to sleep with that. That intention perfumes the nocturnal mind. And very often, I mean, look, the history of the dreams is replete with this. Deidre Barrett out of Harvard wrote this book called The Committee of Sleep, where the whole thing is about dozens and dozens and dozens of exactly these sorts of stories. Composers, musicians, Kekulé, who discovered the benzene structure of the benzene molecule, discovered it in a dream. Descartes, allegedly, in 3 consecutive nights, his some of his foundational philosophical principles came from his dreams. So you can do this serendipitously, but you can do it intentionally. And also, the other thing that comes into play here is very often, and this is what the dream arena also cultivates, is heightened perspective. I mean, one of the reasons principally, we lose lucidity is because there's no perspective. We're completely enmeshed in the display that we call a dream. So, very often, when people are struggling with problems in life, one big reason is they're too close to it. They're so embedded in it, there's no perspective, there's no lucidity. That's why when you go for a walk and you go offline, all of a sudden, because there's some space, there's new perspective, there's an aha, there it is, because there's new perspective. In integral theory, evolution is actually marked by increased perspective. So this is another corollary of problem solving in the nocturnal arena. It helps you differentiate, not dissociate, differentiate from your experiences during the day. You get a new lens on it, you get a new perspective on it. This lucidity principle, it's a code word for awareness, allows you to solve problems during the day that you previously may not have been able to solve. Why? Because you were too close to them, you were embedded in them, you were non-lucid to them. So this again is this kind of interstate bidirectional benefit of working with the dreams.
Okay, I'm going to put two questions together. One
Cool.
is, what if I don't dream or remember a dream? And another person says, I've been trying to have lucid dreams for more than a decade, can't do it, any help? So one person doesn't
Yeah,
remember or doesn't have dreams, they think,
right.
and the other has been trying.
Sure. Yeah. So two things there. So everybody dreams. We go through 4 or 5 cycles of dreaming a night. Is only under extremely rare organic brain disorders where people don't dream. The vast majority of it, the time is we simply don't recognize. We're not aware of dreaming when we're dreaming. There's lots of ways to work with that. Start by increasing your respect and homage to the dream world. We have such a categorical dismissal of this dream state when we say in the West, oh, that's just a dream. That's a dismissive, pejorative statement. We have a dismissive relationship to this quality of mind in this what's called monophasic culture. Well, 90% of the world cultures, by the way, have a polyphasic relationship. They treasure the dream. So, number one, honor, treasure your dreams. Number two, get a dream journal. Start to write down and even the slightest snippet of the dream. Number three, throughout the day, pause. Like, we can do it right now. Well, because I'm talking, it's a little bit less effectual, but the idea is throughout the day, pause, turn the lens of your mind back in and say, what was I just thinking for the last minute? You will discover that we are non-lucid to the contents of our mind at night, i.e. dreams, because we're non-lucid to the contents of our mind during the day. Hello, it's like what Kabir said of death applies to dream. What is found now is found then. What is not found now is not found then. So this ties into the second question. Studies by Benjamin Baird and many others, these studies are unequivocal at this point, have shown, and this is so cool, meditators have more lucid dreams. And in the mind of a meditation master, there's no such thing as a non-lucid dream. All their dreams are lucid. Why? Because they are lucid, i.e., mindful, aware of their contents of their mind during the day. Thoughts are to waking consciousness as dreams are to dreaming consciousness. So you want to attain lucidity at night, attain lucidity during the day. So one of the best ways to work with both these, dream recollection and lucidity, meditate, engage in mindfulness. Every time I go into retreat, I do a dream yoga retreat, like I'm doing it for a month, let's say, when I did my 3-year retreat. Oh my goodness, the more I practice it, the more I do my meditations, every single night, the lucid dreams are popping. So then outside of that, there's so many other techniques you could work with. There's some substances you can engage in called galantamine. It's over the counter, what's called a nootropic. That's a substance that can really help clarify dream content. There's just a vast array of really cool Eastern and Western approaches, scientific, so-called pharmacological and natural, that bring about both increase in dream recall and then increase in lucidity. But the idea here for the second question is whether you know it or not, and this is important to understand, whether you know it or not, something is happening if you're engaging in these practices. The analogy I give is imagine you have a big vat of cold water, depending on how big that vat is, how cold the water is, put it on the stove, turn on the heat. Depending on how much heat you put in, those 3 factors, energy is going into the system. So eventually what will happen, a phase transformation, the water will come to a boil. And so if you understand this and you just keep putting the energy in, again, because this is the most amazing thing. This, like we said 40 minutes ago, lucid dreaming is actually the natural form of dream. We've been trained into non-lucidity. We've been trained through the dark ages of distraction and everything, all the ways that we basically work with non-lucid principles. We have basically been trained into non-lucidity. So therefore, some of the so-called more advanced relaxation opening practices, for those of you who may know the term, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, the formless practices, these are real game changers when it comes to lucidity. Okay?
Okay. Two quick questions. For
Sure.
the person who's asking whether this is recorded, yes, and you will be sent a link. And to Michelle, do you know the Ramana Maharshi quote that you cited and where to find it?
That which does not exist in deep dreamless sleep is not real. Oh, where to source that one? Collected works. I would have to dig that one up. It doesn't come immediately to mind. I have another one of his that's even more compelling if you want me to share it with you. Here, so check this out. When I came across this one from Ariana Huffington's book on sleep, this one just blew my mind because let me share this with you. It's so profound I memorized it, because this shows you the depth of the practice. So this is what Ramana Maharshi says. The sage dreams, but he knows it to be a dream. The same way he knows the waking state to be a dream. Established in the state of supreme reality, the sage detachedly witnesses the other 3 states, waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep, as pictures superimposed onto this. Most people are unable to comprehend this. Oh no, for the sage, all 3 states are equally unreal. Most people are unable to comprehend this because for them, the standard of reality is the waking state, whereas for the sage, the standard is reality itself. This is amazing. It basically means if you can establish the state of supreme reality in Hindu language, in his language, that's what's called Turiya, the fourth, the witness. From that state, you can detachedly witness all three of these other states as variations of contraction and expansion on this foundational dimension of being. Now, I'll pause here because you're going to really get me excited. I'm going to bowl over you all. But this is where this practice really takes thermonuclear power because now you're going to use the nocturnal mind to penetrate the nature of mind and reality itself. This is where we go to the really deep end of the pool and fundamentally realize, as the Buddha did, that this is a dream. Right here, right now, this is a dream. This is a shared consensual hallucination slash dream. And if we can come to understand that, this is in fact what led to the Buddha's liberation. So I'll pause there because I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but this shows you some sense of how far these practices can take you.
Okay, somebody asks the obvious question. You just read that remarkable quote, and Linda Ryan asks then, what is real? What trips me up is how real are events such as terrible events like the wars in Gaza and Ukraine. With your insights, how do you hold these events? Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think you just nailed it with your last comment. This is a very interesting statement. The root of the word dharma, you may know this, Dharma, dharma, means the truth, isness, suchness, refers to the corpus of the Buddhist teachings. It's a multivalent term. But I'm a Gemini. People tell me Gemini's like word origins. I'm definitely that kind of guy. The etymology of the word dharma comes from the root dhr, which does in fact mean to hold. To hold in two ways. One, to hold as in cessation, cease, stop, and also hold as in to contain. Exactly what we talked about 45 minutes ago when we talked about creating holding environments. These are dharmic environments. And so what you said is absolutely spot on. It really depends on how you hold these relative or absolute truths. And so this is where, exactly in resonance with Ramana Maharshi's statement, from a relative perspective, we do have to pay homage to the dream. We have to pay homage, in other words, to what's manifesting. Otherwise, we get into what my friend John Wellwood famously talked about as spiritual bypassing. Oh, it's all just empty. It's all just a dream. It doesn't matter what I do. Oh my God, that's a raging misunderstanding here. So we have to acknowledge what's happening in Gaza, all the injustices, everything that's compromising this meta crisis. We have to hold that properly within the context of relative truth. But as Ramana Maharshi was saying, the way we work with this really skillfully is by creating lucidity, the perspective from that absolute. He said, remember what did he say? Establishing the state of supreme reality. That's the state of emptiness in Buddhist language, from which then you can look at what's happening in the display with much more sensitivity and awareness. And so then what this means that if you're a diplomat and you're working with this, you can actually work with touching into the relative truth of what's actually happening, acknowledging people who are operating from that dimension. But with this heightened, more elevated perspective, dare we say, you have a greater sense of understanding because it's not just merely seeing, it's seeing through. And so I'll leave you with one last analogy here, and then we can move on. So this is a good one for me. So imagine you're sitting, an old guy like me, I'm sitting on my rocking chair on my porch, right? And there's some kids out in the yard and they're playing with their toys and everything's all live, they're having a great time. And all of a sudden, one kid takes the toy from the other kid. And oh my God, all hell breaks loose. They're kicking and screaming and crying, and everything is just all falling apart. Why? Because they're totally lost in that display. You, with your adult perspective, come down off the porch, and because you see a little bit more clearly what's going on, you know exactly what you need to do to get the kids to settle down. So, without that being a dismissive analogy, I think there's some credibility to that type of perspective. You have a more elevated, mature, absolute stance from which you not merely see, but you see into and through. You develop this kind of X-ray vision, like the Taoist tradition talks about, the gaze of the superior man or the superior woman who sees through appearances. And then when appearance is in harmony with reality, that's what lucidity is, that's ultimate lucidity, that's what enlightenment is. Well, guess what? Now you can really step into the fray. Now you can really step into the world and be tremendously impactful because you see what's going on.
Since we're running short on time, I'm going to try to pair two questions
Okay.
together. Something you said earlier, and there are a lot of questions, and to our listeners, I'm so sorry that we're not going to get to them all. They're all great questions. But Gregory Mock asks, what's the best way for beginners without lucid experience to develop lucid dreaming? And then Patrick asks, thank you for the discussion. You may have covered this, but I'm wondering if the efficacy of dream yoga is dependent upon your level of meditation progress. Thank you. So those two kind of, how do you
Yeah.
start, and then
Okay.
does it depend on meditation?
Yeah. So the second one first, meditation absolutely positively helps. This is, again, using the principles of dependent origination. The great thing about the dream yoga approach versus the lucid dreaming approach to lucidity is it draws a very wide scope. So you work with intentionality, you work with meditation, you bring in all these other vectors. So if you're not just engaged in the meditative arena, you bring in other factors. You bring in, again, the induction methods from the West. There's some really sophisticated ways to bring about lucidity in the West. Mnemonic induction to lucid dream, dream initiated lucid dreams. There's a little bit too much that I can ping out right now. But the bottom line is there are so many ways to bring about and nurture the lucidity project. The other one, in terms of like how to do it, well, in a moment of shameless self-promotion, I have 3 books on the topic. We have the course with Tricycle. We go through this in real detail. What we're sprinting through in an hour, we spend what, like 8, 9 hours, James, in this course going through this. We really unpack it there. I had so much fun doing this. And then just briefly again, not again, first time, I have a platform called Night Club. It's just a platform we started 7 years ago to actually support people on this journey. Take courses from people, get associated. There are 500,000 people on Reddit are riffing on lucid dreaming now. The literature is pouring out. Study it, work with it, pay more homage to it. It's amazing if you just change your allegiance to the depth and the profundity of what's available to you in the nocturnal mind. That alteration in view is also a fundamental game changer because it's like you're reestablishing a temple of sleep. You can also work briefly with Eastern and Western approaches to sleep hygiene. There's just a vast array of methods and approaches here to really bring about lucidity.
Okay, I'm going to do something really unfair, Andrew. I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer this question.
Okay.
Deborah Hirschfield asks, I've had detailed active dreams my entire life that provide insight into my life. I have taken both of your courses and find I cannot force or cognitively plan nor control lucid dreaming or dream yoga, but instead, most likely as a result of regular meditation, experience these naturally. Trying to create these doesn't necessarily work because my mind perseveres a goal instead of relaxing into reality, or pursues, I think, a goal instead of relaxing into reality.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely understand it, but here's the deal. These practices, they obviously practices in and of their own right. They have tremendous viability and traction, but the main practice is what you're doing during the day, right? The diurnal practices, the ones you're doing now, these are the core central practices. This is where you're working with lucidity principle at the outset. And briefly, again, sorry, if I understood your question, if you're having these dreams, you don't just working with lucid dreaming and dream yoga alone will also help you with this vast psychological arena of working with dream interpretation, the cathartic aspects of working with the dream principle altogether. So in this narrative of transcend but include, you will find, at least I have, that by working with these practices, it's kind of like, remember trickle down economics? This is like trickle down spirituality. You start with these higher practices, they trickle down, they'll inform, illuminate, and eventually elevate your relationship to however the dream arena manifests for you. So a little sprint for that question, but best I
Okay,
could do.
sorry about that, but
It's all good.
and I'm sorry, everybody, our time has come to an end. So thank you, Andrew, and thanks for everyone for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about Andrew or read his new book, I'm Mindful Now What, visit andrewholecek.com. Holecek is Holecek, andrewholecek.com. We will put the link in the chat right now. And if you'd like to learn more about these nocturnal practices, join his online course, Dream Yoga, which is live now. If you enroll now, you have the opportunity to join Andrew for another live session next week.
Next week.
Course participants, right? We will put the link in the chat now. Again, we'll be dropping a podcast episode with Andrew on September 11th, so keep an eye out for it at tricycle.org/podcast. Again, Tricycle is a nonprofit. If you'd like to donate to Tricycle, visit tricycle.com/donate. If you enjoyed this event and want more monthly conversations with Buddhist teachers and thinkers, visit tricycle.org/subscribe to become a premium subscriber. Or, of course, if that's too confusing, you can write to support@tricycle.org and ask about upgrading. Thanks again, Andrew. And it's great to
Thank you,
see you.
James.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, and thanks, everybody. Great fun.
See you soon.